So my presentation will focus on the last part of my PhD research, namely in the methodological procedures and the application of a behavioral mapping technique. I believe that before starting with the main topic of my presentation, it would be nice to share with you that this technique comes after a long work, theoretical and field work, that firstly implied a systematic review on the cultural ecosystem services provided by urban green spaces. Then we have developed a checklist to access the potential of ecosystem services in these spaces. The application of this checklist was combined with a socioeconomic spatial analysis to understand if this ecosystem services potential is influenced or not by the urban green space surrounding environment. We have also conducted an exploratory survey on urban green space users to know their preferences, what they do, what they want to do and cannot do in these spaces, and their perceptions regarding ecosystem services potential, always trying to connect their preferences and perceptions with the socioeconomic background of the surrounding area. We have also proposed a combination of cluster analysis with behavioral mapping technique to improve the design and future interventions in the UGS. We have measured the environmental concerns of urban green space users and compare them with the general population to see if their ecological worldview is more accurate than the other ones. And this presentation, as I stated before, will focus on the behavioral mapping technique, taking his case study, a public garden located in the city of Porto called Corujeira Garden. In my PhD, we have been trying to move from a sociological approach to a socioecology approach. The first one recognize that relationship between human behaviors and practices and environment is important. And for this one, in the 20s of the 20th century, the Chicago School of Sociology, which was developed in the United States, starts to recognize that the importance of human ecology and the benefit of nature in cities, and most importantly, that human behavior can be somewhat shaped by social structures, but also by the physical environments, and start to apply many ecological metaphors from the field of biology to understand these dynamics. But the socioecology, which is not new, but starts to be new in the field of sociology, recognize that the human in this changing ecosystems starts to be anchored in the framework of sustainability, and also incorporates that human interactions, perceptions, and behavior determine or influence the structure and function of ecosystems. Let me see. Okay. So in the sociology, the observation technique is commonly used to identify the main patterns of social relations between individuals, groups, but also with spaces. And within the observation technique, the direct observation of practices and behavior is the most mobilized technique in the sociological research. But this technique implies rigor to its application, namely because of the deepness of the information collected. However, after I start to try to look to explore the potentialities of this technique, I identify that two of them were missing in this technique, namely the importance of study the relationship between individuals with a space, and also to map this relation translated by behaviors and practices that configure this relation in the space. So I start to explore how behavioral mapping, which it's a technique commonly used in the field of the environmental psychology, can be useful to understand the behaviors and the relationship between users and the public and urban green spaces. This technique was developed in the 1962 by two scholars that study and recorded individuals in a biggest exposition called the Century 21 exposition, where about 10 million people attended. Then this technique starts to be moved to the field of the natural environment by Barker in his book Ecological Psychology. Barker wants to, he was looking for a technique that was intrusion-free. That means that ensure that the behaviors that were recorded in these spaces were natural reactions to the natural environment, so intrusion-free from the observer. The consolidation of this technique happens by the hands of Ethelson, that he starts to design and structure the main steps to apply this technique. This technique, and he starts to do that, namely in the public spaces, but always in, as we will talk later, in a logic of person-centered approach and not space-centered approach. And the recognition of this technique was mainly done by the field of the environmental psychology, as I said before, in an application of person-centered approach. However, and despite the importance of a person-centered approach, from a sociological perspective, and for my PhD research, a place-centered approach fits well because it seeks to observe location of people in a given environment at a given time, and to access mainly the use of this space and how this space can constrain the uses of these people. So as I said before, my PhD is focused on public and urban green spaces, namely those from public access and mainly managed by the local governments, and spaces that foster communication and interaction between people, as we all know here that are vital components of urban ecosystem, of a sustainable and healthy urban ecosystem. The behavioral mapping technique applied to public urban green spaces, or maybe you can say open public spaces, it's not, we have not a lot of previous studies. We have some of them that were, that are considered like the background to us when we try to apply this technique. Zacharias et al., which start to apply this technique in public squares in San Francisco, Golinick and Ward Thompson that apply this technique to compare the uses of two public urban green spaces in two European cities, in the Czech Republic and Scotland. I think I am correct. Rodrigues and Fernandez have applied this technique in Portugal. Rodrigues apply in several public green spaces in Portugal, and Fernandez applied in the Botanic Garden in the city of Porto. So the behavioral mapping technique, before we apply it, we have to design a protocol that is based in 5 steps. The first one relates to the base map creation. Sorry, it's not so the first one is the base map creation. Then we need to move to the definition of observation categories in their codes. Then we need to develop the observation schedule, define the observation procedure, and then we have to train the observer and apply a pretest. I will talk specifically of these 5 steps later. So the garden that we are talking about is the Corujeira garden. It's located in the oriental side of the city, in a parish of a long tradition of demographic decline, which experienced a higher incidence of unemployment rate. 43% of its population live in social status house, and according to Monteiro index, which is an index of socioeconomic and environmental deprivation, this parish integrates a high socioeconomic and environmental deprivation cluster. And for that reasons, we believe that Corujeira Garden is located in the city, is located in a part of the city where he can play a vital role in empower community, providing recreation activities, enhancing social cohesion and well-being. So we want to explore if this Corujeira Garden is fulfilling their functions. So the first step, as I said before, is the base map creation. Corujeira Garden has a rectangular configuration of 2 hectares. It has a massive presence of plane trees, which provides intense shade during spring and summer. It has a wide promenade with a car parking surrounding the spaces, many benches along the sidewalks. There is a lot of garbage present in the grass close to the trees, which reflects the poor maintenance of these green spaces. The pavement is in good condition, and we have small arteries in the middle of the public of these green spaces, which connects some small squares inside the green spaces. After that, we need to perform some free rounds to understand which are the main behaviors that happen in these spaces. This will help us to define the main categories that we will need to be able to observe when we are in these public spaces. So here I bring to you a table just to summarize how I organize my ideas. So I define the main dimensions that I want to check in these green spaces, the main categories, the code, because when we are in the green spaces, we need to quickly identify through a code to save some time, and the description that should be also present, not to us, but when we're trying to publish something, to clearly identify what we are trying to record and to avoid misleadings. The definition of the observation schedule, it's not universal, and this is mainly influenced by the type of green spaces that we are trying to observe. So the Corujeira Garden is a small size, so we can see all the garden from each corner, and the main goal is not to record a lot of users, but to record every time that the area is used, which is quite different because we need to reduce the probability to observe the same people performing the same activity more than one time. So reduce the bias, it's what we are talking about. According to Rodriguez, the urban green spaces should be visited at least during the morning and afternoon and during week and weekend. And he suggests 12 observations, 6 per in the week and 6 in the weekend. And here we have a grid that was used to register the observations. The definition of the procedure is also based in according to the characteristics of the green spaces and on the free rounds. Since the Corujeira Garden is a small spaces, we believe that the 30 minutes of round is enough, each per visit, of course, to identify the main behaviors that are happen in the spaces. But also due to the size of the space and due to the main surrounding area, we need to be careful and to check if the urban green spaces is usually used by the same users. Why this is important? Because the observer needs to be careful, since this is an intrusion-free technique, needs to be careful to not be recognized. And because when the observer is recognized, this can lead to a change in users' behavior. And to minimize this bias, we need to try to change the observation routine and also the route. So the observations must end when the theoretical saturation is reached. That means when no new properties or new observations of behaviors emerge during the analysis. The training is very important because we need to be familiarized not only with the urban green space layout, but also with the categories and the design protocol to ensure that we are easily recording the behaviors that happen in the urban green spaces and to make some adjustments that may be needed. So this is the Corujeira garden. In the figure A, we have the behaviors that were registered in situ by me. Each number represents an user that is performing some kind of activity. And then we have in the figure B, the cartographic representation through the ArcGIS of the user behaviors. And from figure B, we start to notice some main patterns that of user behavior in this space that are quite interesting that we will explore now. So these are the preliminary outcomes of the behavioral mapping applied to Corujeira garden. We are now exploring more in depth this relationship, namely the specialization of the behaviors. But here, from 12 visits to these spaces from August to November 2020, we have observed 175 users. This is a garden with a relative low frequencies intensity, okay? Because this happens mainly not only from their quality, but also from its location. Corujeira garden, as I stated before, is in the oriental part of the city, in the middle of the urban fabric, but it's not in a central or touristic area of the city, so its users are mainly nearby residents. They are mostly male, elderly. They frequent the space with another person and mainly in group of twos. In this map, we have the combination of the sex, age group, and some elements in the city, in the garden. The males are triangles and the colors represent an age, the age group of the users. So we have identified some interesting patterns. Male users tend to be in the urban green spaces with a larger group than females. This pattern was previously identified by an ethnographic study carried out in the Marquês Garden, also in the city of Porto. And female users tend to walk in the garden, while men prefer to stay, sit, and talk and socialize with other men. This green space is mainly used through the urban furniture, that is the path and bench, which are activities mostly performed seated. This happened because the natural elements such as grass and trees are not quite appealing. It may explain the poor exploration of the natural elements of these spaces. Many built elements discourage the exploration of natural elements, as stated by Ferre, which suggests that nature should be dominant to allow the use of imagination and the exploration of the spaces. The south part of the urban green spaces is more used than the north, which emphasizing that sunny areas are more desired by users. These areas are regularly used by older male groups for socialize and to talk. The presence of group of trees are really important because it's under and around them they usually are seated. After this preliminary findings, and after I share these results in a congress, in the Portuguese Sociological Congress, I was asked about the potential and the challenge to apply this technique. Although Summer and Summer state that behavioral mapping can be more effective than interviews or questionnaire, especially when dealing with sensitive populations such as children, I believe that behavioral mapping should not be used as the only technique applied in the research, but has a combined technique. But behavioral mapping has a strong contribution because beyond the observation classic technique, because it is a systematic review that is guided by a protocol. And being a non-intrusive technique, we can assure that the behaviors that we're recording are actually natural reactions to the environment. And also it offers the opportunity to combine both social and ecological variables to analyze how they are mutually influenced. But we need to question to what extent the non-consent observation of users' behavior is correct. Wouldn't it be more ethically correct to for the observer to be identified as such, even if this implies a change in the behavior of users? I have tried to answer this question in the Sociological Congress, and I state that observation technique, it's also a non-consent technique, and no one cares about that. So I am not sure if this is really an ethical issue, since we are recording not sensitive, we're not collecting sensitive information. I don't know if you agree with me. We are recording an approximation of users' behavior because we only say the gender, the approximate age, the behavior, and where he is performing this behavior. So I believe that we need to discuss a little bit more about it. And one of my biggest thoughts is that behavioral mapping was developed by the field of the environmental psychology. So the ethical issues in all techniques that are applied are the same. So we need to collect the data only for research purpose. So I believe that when behavioral mapping technique is applied, and when it's applied anchored in a correct, scientific, and accurate protocol, the ethical issues are safeguarded for the observers, for the users observer. So after this, I have tried to make some policy recommendations to improve Corujeira Garden. I don't bring all the recommendations that we are trying to write. We are not only studying Corujeira Garden, we are studying 4 public and urban green spaces and compare the behaviors that occur in this space and how the urban furniture, the layouts, and the quality of the green spaces shape this user's behavior. But in Corujeira Garden, the poor quality of urban furniture and the maintenance of this garden strongly discourage the fully exploration of the user. So, because instead of lying on the grass to restore, to talk or relax, the users prefer to sit on the bench, mainly located in the path and close to the warm area. It's always important to remark that this garden plays a vital role in this community, or should play a vital role in this community, especially because this is an elderly users that want to go to these spaces to socialize and to contact with each other. So it would be important to improve the built and natural elements on these spaces, namely urban furniture, to attract more users, especially the younger, which are those the last use these spaces. So because the opportunity to play on the grass and to explore the urban green spaces enhances creativeness, promotes physical activity, contributes to increase well-being and the social cohesion of this community, which, as we have seen before, is very deprived. So I would like to share with you some of the final remarks of the behavioral map application. As I said before, the main potentiality is the combination of both social and ecological views. It is actually a more objective measure of behaviors than the self-reports one. I believe that it could be potentiated with other techniques, namely with surveys and interviews. It would be nice after we apply behavioral mapping technique, if I have time to do it, to make some interviews in these spaces to really understand the meaning of being in these spaces, to understand why they are on the grass, why they want to be close to the tree, under the tree. However, we have some time consuming because this technique implies a lot of time in the urban green spaces. It depends in the familiarization with the map, with the categories and the UGS, but it can be really useful to environmental behavior research and to support proper interventions in the landscape urban planning. These are some reference. I can share with you the presentation if you want. So thank you so much for your attention, and I hope you like it, and I hope you have some questions to share with me.